Today we're going to model for you a literature circle discussion. We're going to demonstrate the 4 different roles of summarizing and connecting, word wizard, literary luminary, and discussion director. Ms. Jimerson, as the discussion director, you can direct us.
Yes, so today we're going to be going over Chapter 1 of the Hunger Games. Ms. Federico, can you go ahead and summarize what Chapter 1 was about?
Well, in Chapter 1, we're introduced to the narrator of this book, and her name is Katniss Everdeen. It's the day of something called the Reaping for the district that she lives in, which is District 12, and she's spending it hunting with her good friend Gale. Chapter 1 is used to give a quick introduction to District 12 and to the Capitol, and it explains the tricky relationship between District 12 and the Capitol. At the Reaping, there's one boy and one girl volunteer who are chosen to represent District 12 in the Hunger Games, which is a fight to the death. The chapter ends with the name of the female volunteer being called, and that girl is Katniss's sister, Prim. So, I had a few connections that I made as I was reading this. As far as a text-to-text connection, this book reminds me a little bit of some of the other books that I've read that are about what happens when the world as we know it ends and people have to come together and form a new society. There's a great book called The Last Book in the Universe that I've read that reminds me a lot of this. And the whole idea of the Hunger Games being a fight to the death also makes me think of the movie Gladiator, and that whole concept of being put into an arena and for a sport and for fun, people watching you die or try to survive till the end. Also, as far as connecting the text to myself, I have 2 younger sisters, so I've always felt very protective of them, and like Katniss, I would do anything for them, and I cannot imagine what it would feel like if I was in that situation to hear one of their names be called off. I would be devastated. And as far as connecting this text to the world, on page 18, Katniss describes some of the events that created this dystopian society. She talks about disasters, droughts, storms, fires, and encroaching seas. I took encroaching seas to mean, kind of the rising water level, kind of like we think of with global warming, as well as a war. And it just got me thinking about the world that we live in today and the fact that these are all things that are going on in our world right now. We have lots of disasters, storms, fires. Just on the news last night, there's a big forest fire in California. We all know that global warming is a real issue. So it just really gave me some food for thought.
I also had a connection to that, and it was kind of scary too because they also said North America. So they were directly relating it to the United States and where we live and all those things happening in this kind of being that future of what our country may look like.
Right.
All right, thank you, Ms. Federico. Can we have the literary luminary talk about some of the passages that they thought were important?
Definitely, I would love to. My first one is actually on page 3, which is at the first page of the first chapter, down at the bottom there. And it's talking about Prim's cat, Buttercup. Even though it was years ago, I think he still remembers how I tried to drown him in a bucket when Prim brought him home. Scrawny kitten, belly swollen with worms, crawling with fleas. The last thing I needed was another mouth to feed. And that really struck me because I think it is revealing her character and how she's so accustomed to death that she's even willing to drown a cat. So this language is revealing Katniss's personality and her background and feelings about death. She's rather unemotional, and she tried to drown a cat because it was another mouth to feed. So she's viewing it from that point of view as caregiver for her sister, even though her mother is around. She feels the burden of and the weight of having another mouth to feed. And another one I had is on the next page. And it's just a description of a setting that the men and women with hunched shoulders, swollen knuckles, there's coal dust and black cinder streets. But even though it's just a description, I think it just sets you up for this feeling of dread and the feeling of an ominous approaching situation.
It just sounds kind of dark and depressing. Just
Right.
kind of a depressing
Yeah.
existence.
It's not a cheerful meadow, it's a dark, dusty street.
Good, thank you. Miss Lasasso, can you talk about any words that you thought were interesting that you'd like to share with the group?
I would. So one of the words that I mentioned, and I mentioned it for two reasons. So it's on page 3 for the very first time, but it's reaping. So they keep talking about the reaping, and I got this idea that the reaping was something negative, but then I had heard that phrase, reap what you sow, and so I thought maybe it was some kind of like earning or something. I didn't really understand the word. So I looked up the definition, and it is to cut and collect a plant from a field. And I just thought like how appropriate that word is for this, because essentially that's what they're doing. They're having these folks grow up, and then they're cutting them down, and they're collecting certain specimens from the field to send them away to fight in this game. So I loved that word. And I also brought it up because it's repeated tons and tons and tons, because this whole chapter is about getting ready for the reaping.
Right.
And so obviously the author really wants us to remember that word and remember that focus, I guess.
Good.
So, and then another one I really liked was on page 16. So this one is a phrase, not a word. But on page 16, near the bottom of the last complete paragraph, it says, the camera crews perched like buzzards on rooftops only add to the effect. And I thought that was a really powerful way to say that, perched like buzzards on rooftops, because similar to what you were saying, they were describing this really bleak, negative place. And then we have this idea of all these camera crews, because buzzards, they swoop in and they eat the dead, essentially. And so here they're the camera people, and they're watching this terrible sight go on, essentially for fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it just really adds that negative feel and that dark unhappiness that they all see.
I think it gives us, as a reader, like a sense of that they don't really have a lot of control over their lives either. They are, there's the reaping, and then you're right, like there's these cameras and everybody's watching them for fun, and their life, like the setting too, it's not a very nice and happy place. Good. So I have a couple things that I wanted to talk to you guys about. I wanted to get your thoughts on. On page 3, page 8, and page 15, there was this reference to Katniss and her being distant from her mother, and it doesn't really tell us a whole lot, and so I was just trying to figure out, and it talks to her about maybe not being able to ever forgive her, so I just wanted to know what your guys' thoughts were about that, or maybe what kind of happened between them.
It was page 3 and
Page 8 and page 15, she talks about watching her mother not do anything for her and Prem, and her taking control, and she's never going to be able to forgive her. I was just really kind of interested and intrigued about what was going on with that. What were your guys' thoughts?
I thought that disconnect it stood out to me too. And that related back to maybe her feeling of need to be that caregiver and fill in that role, because it says she's blank and unreachable.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe some feelings of depression there, and having that separation.
I think that you worded that really well, and I feel like maybe there's going to be more to the story. I wonder if we're going to find out a little bit more about that, and they're just kind of setting up the relationship right now. And maybe further in the book, we're going to find out if there was a special
Like something may have happened.
thing that happened.
To
Yes.
create that.
And I agree. The thing that really stuck out to me was when they were talking about where is it? The thing about her eyes. Oh, it's on page 8. So how everyone basically has olive skin and the same gray eyes, but my mom and Prim, with their light hair and blue eyes, always look out of place. How mom came from the merchants, not from the scene, and when she gives Katniss her dress to wear to the reaping, it's a big deal because she doesn't normally do that.
Yeah.
So just kind of, I wondered, like, okay, is mom feeling still like she's a member of the upper class, and so she's struggling with being a member of the lower class, so
Yeah.
Right.
those are my thoughts.
Good. Thank you, Mrs. Awesome. Another thing that I was on page 13, I wanted to talk to you guys about the tesserae. So the tessera can be exchanged for grain or oil. But Katniss was talking to us about, so there's Gale, Katniss, and Madge. Madge is, does anybody remember?
The mayor's daughter.
Oh,
Yeah,
right.
the mayor's daughter. So she only has 6, her name is only in the reaping 6 times. Where Katniss, her name is in there 20 times, and Gale is in there 42 times. And that's because each year they can take out another tessera, and they get some grain and oil for their families. So I just found this really interesting because Madge is more well off, and they're a little bit in the more poor side of the community. What were your guys' thoughts on this? Do you think it's fair that they have more names in the reaping?
It's interesting that that is a voluntary action for them to do that, but they're putting their lives and their safety at risk for their families to have food, right?
And you talked about her character earlier. Do you think that this shows her character, or is another character trait that she does put her name in the reaping every year for her and her family to get more food?
Oh, definitely. I think it shows her selflessness and her bravery. What were you guys thinking?
This kind of made me think of a text to world connection, your question actually, because without getting too far into a different discussion, I just feel like it's kind of the way it is in the world. The people who have the most have it easiest, and so Madge has more, her dad has a job of power, so they have a lot more things, they have a lot more opportunity, and the people who have the least have a harder time getting ahead, and they tend to fall further and further behind. So I like that you brought that out and asked that question, because it got me thinking about how that kind of works in the world.
Well, and I mean, the whole idea of the Hunger Games is terrifying. And it's the whole idea is surrounded by, they even say it on page 19, about how whoever wins the Hunger Game, the capital will show the winning district gifts of grain and oil, and even delicacies like sugar, while the rest of us battle starvation.
Yeah.
So this whole idea of, here are these people, they've got everything that they could possibly want, and so this is fun for them, whereas the people in the scene, this is like terrifying. They have to enter this evil thing in order to live, to make it to next year. So it's like, I might die, but would I rather die in the games, or, because I starved, or, so.
It's kind of sick to think of them purposely holding those things back from people
Yeah.
who need it.
Yeah. And then I don't like, after like a district that does win, it's televised, and all year you get to watch them enjoy all that stuff.
Mhm.
I don't like that
Yeah.
they do that either.
I think that's a larger theme, though. That's that stark inequality between the rich and the poor. So I'm glad you brought that up.
And then the last thing I wanted to talk about, I just wanted to kind of make a prediction as a group. Very last sentence on page 20 was, it's Primrose Everdeen. So Katniss's sister, Primrose, was chosen for the reaping. What do you guys think will happen next?
I think maybe Primrose will get so upset about being picked that she might run away and go underneath that fence and hide.
I can see that happening because she is one of the youngest children. I can see her getting upset and crying.
What do you think?
Just based upon what we know so far about Katniss and her willingness to do anything for her family, I would imagine her reaction to be pretty strong and upset at the Capitol.
Yeah, I would say because she's willing to put her name in more times. Didn't she tell her sister you're not allowed to put your name in more times?
Yes, she
Yeah,
said you're not
she
taking
always-
it anymore.
Yeah, and so I think because she's so focused on saving her sister and her mom and making sure they're happy and healthy, she'll kind of find a way around it. And she's going to try to figure out, how do I get past this and how do I save my sister?
I'm definitely interested to see that. I finished my discussion questions early, so last night I decided to illustrate the first chapter. This is the pen that Madge was wearing when Gale and Katniss opened up the door, and Katniss commented on if she had that gold pen, that she would be able to feed her family and a lot of families forever, so that was kind of unfair. But I thought it was also the cover, so I decided to do the cover. And it says, "May the odds ever be in your favor," and that's what Effie Trinket. So I decided to do an illustration.
That's
I thought the
really
chapter
good.
was. Thank you.
You did a really nice job.
Thank you.
Yes.
So anything else to add?
No, I think we should probably work together to set some goals for our next discussion.